get things started. Ready? Go!
Hello and welcome to Bounding Into Comics. My name is John Trent. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief at Bounding Into Comics. Today I got a story about Taika Waititi and his upcoming Thor, Love and Thunder film, where he describes the film as a, quote, midlife crisis film. And then he also said that he wanted to make the film the least expected thing within this franchise. So let's get into it here. I wrote up this article earlier today. As you can see here, the title says Thor, Love and Thunder director Taika Waititi describes it as a midlife crisis film, wanted to make, quote, least expected thing with this franchise. So he spoke with Entertainment Weekly about the film. He first said he didn't want to make a repeat of Thor Ragnarok, saying, what I didn't want to do is just make Ragnarok again because that's been done. He then explained, I needed to do something more interesting for myself to keep the whole thing ignited and to make sure that I'm feeling creatively stimulated. I felt, what's the least expected thing with this franchise? So we're going to stop right here. You've probably heard this phrase before or a variation of it. I think the most popular variation of this phrase is, I'm going to subvert your expectations. And now that has become code with absolutely garbage storytelling, because you're not subverting anyone's expectations. You're actually meeting the expectations because we expect you to do all of these absolutely insane, stupid things to these characters. And most of the time, those insane, stupid things usually have to do with identity politics and inserting identity politics into the story. Or we'll have like something like a self-insert character, which we'll get to a little bit later, because I think that's exactly what Taika Waititi is talking about when he describes the film as a midlife crisis. So let's get to this. I mean, he's basically telling you he's going to subvert your expectations. I remember Rian Johnson saying that about The Last Jedi, and he sure did subvert a lot of expectations, because instead of making a good Star Wars film, he made an absolutely garbage one that destroyed a lot of the characters. And I think Taika's already kind of did that with Thor Ragnarok, so I'm not surprised that he would be doubling down on it in Thor Love and Thunder. So let's continue here. From there, Waititi discussed the differences between Ragnarok and Love and Thunder, describing Ragnarok as, quote, a bit like a party, saying it was quite festive. In contrast, he explains that Love and Thunder is still fun and it's got moments of being over the top, but thematically it's about something a bit deeper than the last film. It's not a serious film and it's not a drama, but we do deal with ideas that I think a lot of humans deal with, universal themes about love and loss and our place in the world. The first Thor movie did that as well. Definitely dealt with love and loss. And I would argue it also dealt with your place in the world. So it's kind of weird that, remember he said he wanted to do something different for him, but it's almost like for us as the audience, we've already seen this. We saw this in the very first Thor film. I guess they're hoping that we have really short memories, and then we've forgotten that first film, and then it doesn't really exist anymore, so they can basically remake it in their identity politics image. But then Waititi goes on and says, everyone sort of asks this question in the film, what is your purpose? What is the reason that you're a hero? And what do you do when you have these powers? It's almost like those are the questions that were asked in the first Thor film as well. So he then proceeded to describe the movie as a midlife crisis film, explaining that's the question we ask everyone. Are we doing the right thing, and are we doing all we can in the world? I think right now, while the world is still healing from this pandemic, it's a good question to ask. It's like, well, are we doing enough to look after each other and to look after ourselves? Well, first of all, I have a really big problem with this. When Taika Waititi is saying, are we doing the right thing? This coming from Hollywood, where he's literally been photographed in some kind of like menage a trois. I don't think I'm going to be taking moral advice from him on what is right and wrong. He clearly doesn't know what it is, or if he does, he's actively flaunting it or completely going against what is right and wrong in his own personal life. So to somehow say that this moralizing is going to be in the film is a huge red flag. And we know when anytime Hollywood does do moralizing, they're usually doing the opposite. They're trying to get you to think that what is right is actually wrong and what is wrong is actually right. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see that in the film. I will not be surprised if Gore the God Butcher is somehow made out to be an actual hero, and by him being defeated, the heroes are actually the villains. I wouldn't be surprised if we see something like that, or at least there will be a lot of fans with that takeaway. If not intended, they will definitely try and interpret it that way. And then as for this idea of him asking, are we doing enough to look after each other and to look after ourselves? I seriously don't want to take advice from him on that either. We know how Hollywood reacted to the pandemic. Absolutely nonsense reaction. They clearly didn't care about anyone, and it was all about power and control. So again, kind of gets back to that moralizing issue where they're trying to make what is right wrong and what is wrong right. Well, let's move on here, because I do kind of break down some of his comments here a little bit more. The midlife crisis of asking what your purpose is and your reason for being a hero might be new ground for Waititi at the helm of Thor, but that was one of the primary themes of the first Thor film, as I kind of already mentioned. In that film, Thor's arrogance, brashness, and pride are his undoing as he seeks to provoke a war with Jotunheim in order for them to fear him. His actions, orchestrated in the background through Loki's deceptions, almost end up having him start an interplanetary war between Asgard and Jotunheim, and who knows how many other realms might have gotten involved in that conflict. While Odin puts a stop to the conflict, he does punish Thor by casting him out of Asgard and stripping him of Mjolnir and the powers the hammer bestows. As Thor goes on his hero's journey, he learns about love, sacrifice, and duty. It's these lessons that he learns while on Earth or Midgard, and then he actually puts into practice in his battle against the Destroyer, that he proves that he's once again worthy of wielding Mjolnir. In fact, at the end of the film, Odin recognizes the change in his son, telling him, "You will be a wise king." Thor's response also shows his character's evolution as he replies, "There will never be a wiser king than you or a better father. I have much to learn. I know that now. Someday, perhaps, I shall make you proud." By the end of the first film, Thor knows what his purpose is and why he is a hero. He also has a strong moral code, knowing what is right and wrong. As we see in his conflict with Loki, he calls out his brother for his deception, for what Loki is doing as wrong, which it is. And he puts a stop to it. So to apply those questions to Thor doesn't really make sense, but if the first trailer is any indication of what his character arc will look like, it definitely appears that they will be going that way. I mean, there's literally a scene in the trailer where he just gets up and walks away from the fight that him and the Guardians of the Galaxy are about to engage in. They go running off, and he literally just turns his back and walks away. Something that Thor would never do if that was a just cause. It's possible, given the fact that he's working with the Guardians of the Galaxy, what they're doing might not be a just cause, given the Guardians of the Galaxy are a bunch of criminals who just happen to come together to save the galaxy on a number of occasions. I wouldn't necessarily call them righteous characters or always doing the right thing. They clearly engage in bad behavior a lot of the time. So maybe that's the case, but I think I'm giving the movie too much of a benefit of the doubt there, and I really don't expect that to actually be the case. They're actually probably doing something good, and Thor just decides to walk away because he's having this quote-unquote midlife crisis. Again, the whole idea of Thor having a midlife crisis is utterly ridiculous. This guy has been around for thousands of years, even in the Marvel Cinematic Universe timeline. So to claim that he's all of a sudden having these problems, especially after the first Thor film, is just kind of utterly ridiculous. What would have been more interesting if he's like learning lessons about kind of how to be an even wiser king and kind of the diplomacy that goes into being a king and how sometimes that diplomacy can fall apart, and then maybe even the fact that there are times when violence or war is justified and you need to engage in it. That could have been something that Thor could have learned. It's just that the way he went about it in the first Thor was not justified, as he was the one being the warmonger, being the aggressor. Whereas like it could have been really interesting to see Asgard kind of maybe come under attack again, and he's got to marshal the troops, get them ready to fight. Again, that probably would have made a much more sense if you had that like kind of after the first Thor film, rather than all of the things that have gone on afterwards with Asgard just being wiped off the face of the galaxy. But again, those questions that Taika talks about or mentions, those are, I think, good questions for Jane Foster, Valkyrie, and possibly Christian Bale's Gore the God Butcher and Russell Crowe's Zeus. Although I don't know, I'm tired of having these questions about these villains. I'm fine with a villain just being a villain. There's almost something satisfying to maybe a villain like Galactus, where he's just like, you know what, I just got to eat people, or a Doctor Doom that's like, you know what, I don't like I want to control everything and be powerful, and I'm going to go about and do that. Whereas like you don't need these kind of like they changed Thanos into kind of this like eco-terrorist type character where he's like he wants to save the galaxy from itself. I don't really like that. There's you don't need to give them these kind of justifications for why they're doing it. I actually think they failed on that description with Thanos. It would have been much more interesting if he was actually they kept the comic book motivation of his character true, and he was doing it because he worshipped death and he wanted to provide death more sacrifices. I think that would have actually been a much more compelling motivation than the kind of eco-terrorist they made him out to be. But yeah, so that's pretty much all I really have to say about this. I think this is just going to be another MCU film. I don't really expect anything from this. They're telling you that they're going to quote unquote subvert your expectations. They're telling you it's about some like midlife crisis Thor. Again, I think that is a self-insert from Taika Waititi. He's clearly in midlife, and maybe he's having his own crisis. Maybe that's why he had those photos of him and his girlfriend and Tessa Thompson on that balcony taken. So that probably is apt, and he's applying that into his own story now. And I think that's what kind of people like Taika do with their writing. They try and put that their own life problems that they're having into their film, rather than kind of trying to tell these tales that stand the test of time and teach kind of universal values like we saw in the first Thor film. So let me know what you think about Taika Waititi's comments here. And do you expect anything big from Thor, Love and Thunder? Like, what are your expectations for that film? Let me know. My name is John Trent, and you've been watching Bounding into Comics.